Happy Tuesday, everybody. Happy Wednesday to people in the West, Australia and such. Hope you had a good week. I'm going to spend a little bit of time today talking about fins. There is, I used to talk so much about fins. I used to obsess so much about fins. My son used to say, "Dad, stop using that four-letter word." But my fascination with fins, my first few boards, an extra asymmetrical, had a kind of a cutaway fin, sort of almost. And then my next two boards were the Miranda twin fins, and those were definitely like cutaway fins. But I never really paid much attention to fins. And until I really, I started working at the GNS factory about 1971. And at first I didn't have my own shaping stall because I was just like help when it was busy, in spring and summer. But for, after Christmas to March, there wasn't much work. But I got to shape next to Skip Fry, and I got to know him, and he was obsessed with fins. He was really the first person that really taught me a lot about fins. And all the the height, the base, the rake, even the foil and the material it was made out of. Skip was a big fan of 4-ounce layups. Typically, most glass fins are 6 or 8-ounce layups, and the heavier the cloth, the fewer the pieces of cloth that are needed to achieve the just over 1/4 inch thickness for modern fins these days. And there's a zone in between a 1/4 inch and a 1/2 inch. A 1/2 inch, I think, is just way too thick. Some people have water flow theories that the 1/2 inch thick fin, the foil works even better. But my experience is maybe 5/16 of an inch is probably the optimum thickness for a fin. There's materials that we could make thinner fins out of, but I was driving to work the other day, and I've done this before, but I had my hand out the window, just tripping on fins, and I had my hand like this, and if I turned it slightly, it would react very quickly. Whereas if I cut my hand a little bit, it was very smooth. The pressure was very smooth. And that's 20 years ago. I'd known Curtis Hesselgrave since the early 70s and the Hinson days. But I worked with Curtis Hesselgrave. He's passed. Rest in peace, Curtis. But I asked him one day, because we've been doing a lot of fins together, and I asked him one day, are you working on anything new? And he thought about it for a second. Well, I'm doing some foils for Laird, for big waves. And I said, well, tell me more about them. But I'll get to those later. So Skip had a tremendous influence on me. He always had a box of, 6, 8, 10 fins. I go, what are the fins for? And he goes, well, different conditions. And he explained to me, maybe a more rake fin for a little bit bigger surf, more upright fin for, more pivoty type surfing, and, a thinner foil for, maybe smaller, mushier surf, a little bit thicker foil for heavier surf. And as I mentioned before, he liked 4-ounce because the heavier the cloth, the fewer the layers you need. But you think about it, and the less cloth you have, or the more cloth you have, the bigger the weave on the cloth, the more resin it holds. So like an 8-ounce fin is going to be a lot of resin, and the resin, especially polyester resin, is stiff, and the fin won't have any flex. And sure, you can make beautiful fins, different resin bleeds and swirls and whatnot, but from a functionality standpoint, I mean the fins are beautiful, but from a functionality standpoint, at least as far as I'm concerned, uh, they become so stiff they start to lose function. And if you could imagine a shortboard today with very, very rigid fins with no flex, I don't think you'd like it. But so I followed suit with Skip. I started getting my fins personal quiver made out of 4-ounce tube because it takes at least 30 layers of 4-ounce to get to that 5/16 thickness, maybe 3/8, but it's a real fine line on how thick a fin needs to be. And over the years, just from personal experience, I started understanding more and more about fins. And around the late 70s, GNS had a fin box star system. And it was a fin box with, I believe it had it had one screw, and it was, a little clip-like thing that hooked inside the box. And they were pretty good, but they're plastic fins. And I've always said, I almost made a t-shirt once that said, "Friends don't let friends ride plastic fins," because they suck. They have a very uniform flex. It's the recovery rate on the flex is slow. It's compared to modern fins today, the hybrids with carbon and whatnot. The plastic fins have a very slow rebound rate, and so the GNS had the star system, but into the early 80s, everybody was still pretty much using glass-ons, and then FCS came along, and their first several years, all they had were plastic fins, and nobody really noticed, but all the good surfers noticed, and they kept riding glass-ons. And after a while, I started to realize, these things suck. They turn hard and they bend. They bend so much, you start to slip, and you start to lose energy, you start to lose drive. And so I tried to find somebody to make me fiberglass fins that would fit the FCS box. And most people were pretty reluctant because once FCS got word of it, they started thumping their chest and threatening, and it's proprietary, and so it was a little difficult at first to get people to fin makers to make fins with FCS boxes, but eventually FCS started to figure it out, and they started making composite fins, maybe a little bit of high density foam in the center, and then a little bit of S-cloth or 4-ounce cloth, and then some carbon, to start to control how the fins flexed. And they evolved, and at first they were okay, and then they've gotten better. I think, FC Futures, stepped in. I'm not sure exactly when Futures launched, but I know that in the late 1990s, I started to work closely with them because they were much, FCS was worldwide. It was the biggest, and, they got, famous surfers to endorse their fins, and a couple of shapers, but as they grew, my relationship with them I started to separate from them a little bit, and I started working very closely with Futures fins because they're very receptive to ideas and input. And I worked a lot with Curtis Hesselgrave in the late 90s and into the 2000s, and so at this point in time, FCS fins and future fins, I mean, they've become so well designed now that it's hard to choose who's got a better fin in terms of flex. And it comes down to the box. Futures hasn't really changed their box system. And I believe that it's a very solid box system. And I don't really want to endorse either fin system over each other, but there's certain constructions, like Futures is, I think, a must in EPS. And all the other foams, it's whatever your preference is. But switching from history to design, I had a good friend and a long-time customer asked me the other day, he just gotten a new board, and it was like a gun for him. But since he's an older gentleman, we've widened over the years the boards. The boards, over the years, the boards get wider and thicker. So his semi-gun was a little bit wider and thicker than a regular semi-gun. So the design of the fins, I mean, the first thing is maybe the size to talk about. I think the average person, 145 to 165 pounds. I think a 4.5, that's the height of the fin. And a 4.5 inch tall fin, there's a variety of templates with different rake. That's the distance from the tip of the back of the fin to the base of the back of the fin. And the rake is, give or take a little bit, 1 3/4 to 2 inches. And the base is very similar to the height. So 4.5 inch fin will serve, most people say, I like 145 pounds, up to, I said 165, but possibly 170, 75 pounds. If you're lighter, you should probably look at a fin that's about 4 and 3/8, like a 4.4 or 4.35 height fin. And if you're bigger, you should probably start looking at a fin that's 4.6. And once you start getting into 4.7, 4.8, with a complementing base, you're starting to get so much area on the fin that, those types of really big fins are used primarily on twin fins, because they generate so much lift. And the early twin fins, they had big fins, and modern day twin fins have big fins. I don't think a twin fin with a trailing box is a twin fin. A twin fin is a board with 2 fins or 2 boxes. If you put the cheater box in, you start to lose some of the beauty of a pure twin fin. But so the height of the fin is kind of important, and it also relates to the width of the board. If you have a semi-gun that's 7.2 and it's 18.5 inches wide, you can ride about a 4.5 inch fin on it. If you rode a deeper fin, I think it would start to fight your rail-to-rail transition. If you rode anything much smaller than 4.5, you'd probably have some issues with sliding and getting some distance out of your turns. And as you get into bigger, like the big guy boards, the old guy boards that are 21, 22, 23. I make some boards 24 inches wide. You're going to need a fin that complements the width of the board. There's different types of flex. You know, soft is like the mushy plastic fins. Although some of the plastic fins were made thicker, so they were a little bit more rigid, but they still had the same type of flex. It was not very dynamic at all. You know, and I saw Aki, love him. He rode FCS fins. I was sponsored by him for a while, and I said, well, I want to try some Aki's fins, and they're kind of a little on the thin side and on the flimsy side. They're actually kind of soft, and I wasn't making Aki boards anymore, but I checked his boards. I checked I don't think he ever rode his fins. He may have, but I don't think he did. He still had glass on fins, or glass fins for the boxes. But you know, the modern day fins, you know, I think if you have the right type of wood and you glass it correctly, that makes a pretty decent fin. Especially you know, if it's combined with a couple of layers of exotic cloth. But the wooden fins, I think, are pretty legit. But most of the fins these days have some kind of high density foam core to keep the weight down, and then they have all kinds of different carbon and wonder cloth arrangements. But the flexes, you know, there's still a lot of composite fins that are fairly stiff. You try to bend the tip, and it fights you a little bit. But in my mind, the most dynamic fin is a fin that has a graduated flex, and that is it's stiff the bottom third. It starts to bend in the middle third, and the tip, as you get maybe up to the last inch and a half or so, bends easier, and it has a very quick rebound rate. And though, you know, as I said before, friends don't let friends ride plastic fins. Most surfboard companies these days give plastic fins, or you can get plastic fins for $15-20. I would say put those aside, and you know, you've spent you know, quite a bit of money on the new board. It's like tires on a car. You know, you got yourself you know, like a hot rod, or you know, you wouldn't spend a lot of money on a great car and then spend as little as possible on shitty tires. You know, and the tread is important. You know, it's like, think of it as tires in the car, and the performance you can get from different treads and heights and air pressure and all that. Yeah, spend the extra 90 to 190 some of the new fins these days, and I'm not sure they're a whole lot better or twice as much. They cost twice as much, but they're the latest built by some high-tech factory in Europe fins. You know, I'd say for $120 to $140, you can get yourself a nice 3-fin set or a 5-fin set. And you know, if you really start to get how much the fins affect the board, the way they affect the board. I've got another good friend who I've made a lot of boards for over the years, and you know, he's getting older, but he still rides high performance short boards. And you know, I said, you know, get this next board with 5 boxes, and he goes, well, I don't know about 4 fins and blah blah blah. And I ran him the other day, and he said, you know, when I talked to you a couple of weeks ago and you suggested switch it to a 4-fin, I said, what the heck? And he said, I wrote it, and the first wave, I could tell there was a world of difference. And he's like, now he's freaking on 4-fins. And, you know, I made my first 4-fin surfboards, the early 80s. First there was the twin fins in the late 70s and the tri-fins in 81, and at the same time there was, you know, people making caricature boards with 10 fins, but there were some decent amount of work being put into 4 fins, but they were different back then. All 4 fins were basically the same size, and nowadays your front fins could be maybe a touch smaller, but I don't think they really need to be. But your rear fins on a quad, I think between 4 and 4 1/4 is ideal. 4.3 maybe, but if you start to go under 4, you start to get you start to lose the benefit of those rear fins. You start to push them through the water instead of getting resistance and drive. And once they start getting close to the same size as your front fins, you're starting to get too much drag, and the board will probably be fast, but a lot stiffer. And I've always put my front fins about 1 1/4 to 1 5/16 from the rail, and twin fins even farther from the rail, 1.5 inches, 5/8. And then the trick on the quads rears are, what I do is I take the distance from the rear of the front fin to the tail and say that's 11 inches. Then I cut that in half, and that's generally where I put my rear fins. I cut it in half, and so I'll put them up 5, and actually it's a little less than half, and then I put them much farther in from the rail than I think a lot of people do. And that, if you can imagine the rear fins, the closer they get together, the more it's going to feel like a tri-fin, and the farther apart they get, the more it's going to feel like a twin fin. And so I put them roughly 2 inches in from the rail. It just depends on the tail width. So I, in terms of fin boxes, I'd say most designs you're probably it should probably just pay a little bit extra money for 5 boxes just so you have a chance to experiment. And there's all kinds of experimentation that can be done, like for a brief period in the early 80s. Erica Calla and Pat Rawson and a few others were doing a little bit smaller front fins, like maybe 4 inches, and a 6-inch rear on their guns. And there's a lot of people that still today go with, they have 4.5, 4 5/8 fronts, and they'll go with a little tiny trailer on the tail. And as I said before, I think you need to make a commitment to a proper twin fin or a proper tri-fin. And if the fin is too small on the tail, it's counterproductive. It feels looser, but you're pushing it through the water, and you're not getting the proper projection out of the turns. And then there's the position. We all sort of have a traditional distance from the tail that we put fins, but I think there's room. I made Tom Carrollson boards in the early 80s, and he surfed so off the tail of his board. His front fins were like 10 1/4, and his rear fin was like 2.5, maybe 2 inches off the tail. So when you tried to set the board on his tail, the tip of the rear fin was sliding you. Aki, I used to set his fins at 11, and the typical thinking back then was 11 and 3 1/4 or 3.5, but Aki liked his at 2, and he liked his rear fin at 2 3/4 because, once again, he's a pretty solid back foot surfer. And anything farther up, and he'd start to lose power and control. So, with that being said, I'm not going to waffle on too much longer about fins, but I think boxes are great. I mean, I can't think of a pro these days that uses glass-ons. Maybe sometimes in guns, but since FCS figured it out, and features came along, and the quality of the fin laminations for the boxes improved. I don't see the need for glass ones anymore. It takes away so much freedom to experiment with your board, and whether you want to have larger front fins and a smaller back fin. And once again, I warn you that if you go too small, you're going to think the board feels looser, but you'll be getting some drift. You'll be pushing that tail through the water rather than having the thing carve. And then there's asymmetry. I've told this story before too. A good friend and a great photographer, Tom, got a board for me and rode it for 6 months and said, "Man, this thing's so magic. I got to replace it." And this is when I started using the computer shaping. He said, "No problem." And so I reproduced the program and I shaped the board, and I put, I marked the fins and everything. And he got the board, he wrote it. He goes, "It's good, but it's not magic." And I go, So I tried one more time, and he got it back, and he goes, "It's the same thing. It's not." And I said, "All right, bring the good board in, and we'll take a look at it." And the fins were offset. I don't know how it happened, but one side the fin was up a half an inch, and the other side, back side was, the fin was back half an inch. So there was almost an inch difference between the two fins, and he loved the board. He swore it was magic. And I made asymmetricals for, my first board was an asymmetrical. I made asymmetricals for a few guys. Henry Hester used to be a great skater and a pretty competitive surfer at one time. And so you might consider offsetting your fins slightly, or having one, farther from the rail than the other. But anyways, there's so much to be done with fins, and like I said, it's like, if you have a car that you know how it handles, and you change the tires, it's going to feel different. So, that's enough about fins today. That's about half the time. What else we got?
I got some questions.
I have another one too. It's it's guys. Usually it's guys that haven't surfed that long, and they're coming off of a wave storm, and they want to get a 6.0, and I try and convince them not to take more than 6 inches, drop 6 inches more at a time. Especially if they're heavier surfers. If they're lighter surfers, maybe 9 or 12 max. But the size of your board is important, and and everybody gets so hung up on thickness and volume. I had a guy a day or two ago that ordered a board, and he gave me his dimensions, and I usually try to hit. I usually try to hit what I think is the best. You can get the if he looks on the board builder and he sees it, it's boards 2.4 inches and thick, and it's 30.2 liters, and he wants 30 liters, and he wants 2.4. I can fudge a little bit on the design. I can lean the rails out a little bit. I can lean the foils out, or I can fatten them up a little bit. But I had a guy sent me back a letter. I programmed this board. He's a light surfer, and he sent me back an email in bold letters. He said, "Look, I want a 2.4, not 2.36." And I mean, you guys know what 400ths of an inch thick is, right? It's like that, and a couple extra, And once again, I said this many times before. The finish shape, the software programs and figures out the volume on the unfinished shape. And when you finish a shape, you can lose 4/10 of a liter easily. So, please. I've been doing this for 50 years. I've got 100,000 boards under my belt, 50,000 hand shaped, another 50 done on the computer. And trust me, especially I get the problem with a lot of new surfers, but I get the same issue with a lot of older surfers that now that the volume thing has become commonplace on everybody's website, they think they're a volume expert. And I have guys that, I had a guy the other day that he was a younger guy, he weighed 6'3" and 240 pounds, and he wanted a 511, and he wanted it 30 liters. I had to explain to him, I go, I can make you that board, but A, you're going to have a hard time catching waves, and B, you're going to have a hard time linking your turns together. The board will be bogging. And he goes, oh, okay, well, and I mentioned my son, who's the same height. He's like 6'4" and 215 or 20, and he rides in the high 30s, the low 40s, and he's a good surfer. Wade Carmichael, who's our top pro on the tour, is called McKeg. He's like 5'11" and 190 pounds, and his go-to shortboards are 6.0, and they're 31 liters now. And I generally give a liter for every 10 pounds, and so I just going off of Wade's formula, 190 to that's 50 pounds. That's 5 liters. So he's, this guy that I'm making this board for, I gave him those comparisons, and I said, really, the least you should be riding, and this is if you're a very advanced surfer, is 36 liters if you weigh 240 pounds. So I know I comment on volume every time I get on here, but it's an issue. I think typically a lot of bigger guys that are still younger tend to under volume their boards, or they want less volume than is really good for them. I saw, I forget who, maybe Brett, one of the great Hawaiian shapers recently did a post on Instagram, and he said, fact, 70% of the surfers out there really know very, very little to nothing about design, or something like that. But so yeah, this is the volume thing, and you got to trust me. I've got experience. I've got a big son. I'm big, and I shape boards for kids that weigh 80 pounds, and so I've got plenty of experience there. The best place to find rusty surfboards outside of California, U.S. East Coast options. 10 years ago, we used to sell thousands and thousands of boards all up and down the East Coast, but I won't linger too long on this either, but unfortunately with Firewire coming in, their boards are made in Asia. They land here for just over $200, and so the markup for the maker is quite heavy, and then the retailer gets an extra markup, and there's really no pressure to pay. They'll come trade out Firewire will come trade out any board they want. They have demo fleets, and so more and more big makers started following suit, and pretty soon the shops went from they used to be pretty good about net 30, net 60, and then they wanted to go to net never. And so it's that coupled with social media, it's our business on the East Coast in shops has declined. There's still a couple, but we primarily do mostly custom work, and the beauty of that is you you go into a shop and you maybe compromise a little bit on the shape. It's not quite what you wanted, but it's close enough. But with a custom, you should be able to get close to what you want or what you think you need. It depends on how much, once again, you trust your shaper. But so yeah, we do custom boards, and we have a timetable for the different constructions, and sometimes it varies a little bit depending on how busy we get. But like for example, a PU, a polyester polyurethane traditional build board, we can build those in 3 to 4 weeks. Whereas if you go to other major manufacturers, 6, 8, 10 weeks. And who knows if they'll, well, I'm not going to go there. But we take a lot of pride in trying to get the board, what's right for you. And I might argue with you a little bit, but in the end, it's your call. What else we got? Oh, okay. The Rusty brand is legendary, not just for boards. What was the biggest surprise for you with being in the brand business, clothing, etc., over the years? There's a couple. When I left, I gave my notice at Canyon on 4th of July, 1985. And it took me about 4 months to fulfill all the orders. And then I started my own. Then once I was done, I went in, strictly into my own business. And I was like, I wasn't sure I did the right thing. And, there was a period of a couple of years in the early, from 81 to 84, where I was questioning if I was really in the right business. And I thought, maybe I should start pursuing art or something. But the day I finished with Canyon Surfboards, my phone started ringing off the hook. So I thought, my God, this is like the dog that's chasing the truck, and all of a sudden he's got his teeth on the rear bumper, and he's going, what have I done? So, I have so many people I'm thankful for that have been in my life, great dealers since the beginning. Huntington Surf and Sport, you're awesome. And so that was one of the biggest surprises, at how fast my own label took off. And then as I said before, I always had a bit of an artist in me. That's what I graduated from UCSD, and it was an art degree. But I used to design some of the handful of shirts that and the board logos that Canyon used. But when I started my own brand, I started off with one T-shirt, and it absolutely blew up. And so I designed a few more, and within a year, the T-shirt business had exploded to big numbers. And I wanted to focus on shaping, so a friend of mine was trying to sell me some life insurance at the time. He got a hold of the numbers I was doing, and he goes, wow, you ever thought about a partner? And I said, no. And a few months later, I called him and I said, well, I'll sell you X amount of the brand for this amount of money. And he got another friend, and they rounded up the money. And so I still primarily own the whole business, but I split it in two. I had the clothing business move into a separate building a few miles away, and it still kept growing. I was blown away at how fast the surfboards took off, and I was really blown away at how fast the clothing took off. And when we got to a certain size, we couldn't afford to finance it anymore, because clothing you have to pay 6, 9, 12 months in advance for. from the time you start developing it, you send it overseas to get built, and then it comes here, and then it stays in the shops for a few months before you get paid. It's like a 9 or 12-month cycle. And we couldn't afford it anymore. We had, I had, some private investors that came on board. Aaron Pye at Huntington Surf and Sports, Laguna Surf and Sport, and a couple of friends here. And that was a Band-Aid that lasted about a year, and then I had to find a licensee. And the licensee focused on us. They had a couple of other pretty big brands, but they started to phase them out and focus on us. And trust me, I'm very thankful to this day for the business, and it's still doing extremely well in some other countries. Starting to make a bit of a comeback here. I sold the brand in 2005, and the people that bought it were our Australian licensees. But answer your question. Some of the biggest moments and the heaviest moments when I realized, I got this car bumper between my teeth, and I got to hang on. And surfboard related questions. How has the pandemic affected you guys, if at all? The COVID thing, I think it stunned everybody when it first started to happen. In the first couple of months, our custom order business started to slow down. But then around May or June, it started to pick up. And, in the last few months, I think the whole industry has come alive. Again, we know the guys that make the foam, and they're saying, oh my gosh, we got to work 7 days a week now. And so, yes, it affected us. And I think the other thing it did is it gave the internet online business a bit of a kick in the rear. It pushed it. The fact that most shops are closed, a lot of factories got shut down, a lot of factories closed because there was no business, and so that that coupled with the online business, it just our online business. I'm not going to say exploded, but it really grew pretty quickly. And some of the shops that have been pretty quiet for a few years, because they got conditioned to basically free inventory from most of the major makers. They bring the boards in, and if they don't sell within 2 weeks or a month, they ask them to rotate them out. And when they do sell, they don't exactly pay on time. I call them net nevers. But yeah, it's the pandemic has almost had a reverse effect on the business now in the last few months. People wanted new boards. It's summertime, and a lot of times it was, I get comments like, oh, this is the first time I've ever ordered a board online. I'm used to walking into a shop and putting it under my arm, and so social media, Instagram and so forth, and our own website. We put a lot into our own website, and it's almost having a reverse effect on our business and the way I want to take our business. I've been doing this for 50 years, and I'm primarily interested in doing custom boards. I truly am. So, what else you got?
Can the C5 be relevant nowadays, or quads do a similar job?
No, they're right. Is the C5 relevant today, or does a quad do a similar job? The C5, is a lot different than the quad. The quad doesn't have a center fin, and to put it simply, boards with center fins, they want to go perpendicular to the wave energy. Single fins, center fin, tri-fin, center fin. They want to go perpendicular to the wave energy. They want to straighten out. Boards with no center fin, they want to find their way parallel to the wave energy. The C5 is basically a tri-fin with the little Twinser canards, and I had a C5 challenge, trestles, 1995 or something like that, and I tried to I tried to share my knowledge with all the other shapers out there, and some of them asked me for like my thoughts on fin placement, and I happily shared it with them. But most of the people, they just stuck 5 fins on a board. But a C5 is it's got the squirt. If you've ever ridden a Twinser, if the fin placement's right, it almost makes the fins feel like they're not there, but they hold. They hold extremely well, and they accelerate through cutbacks. And then you add a rear fin, and you just get more drive. Whereas quads are very loose, very fast. One criticism of the quad is, well, I can't really change my arc very dramatically. I can't bring it up the face as I want, face as fast as I want. But once again, your fin size and your fin placement, you could, if you like everything else about a quad, you could correct that with maybe a slightly different fin placement. Maybe the quads are a little bit farther back, a little bit closer together. And as I said before, the closer those rear fins come together, the more it's going to feel like a single fin, and the farther apart they get, the more it's going to feel like a quad. Quad fin.
What's the best beginner board in your lineup?
What is the best beginner surfboard in your lineup? Well, we've got a bunch of big guy boards. The Big Cat is a board I rode for a while, and I'm a pretty big guy. The key thing is to go online and look at any of our boards. The Big Cat, the Yeti, the Zeppelin, and the Moby Fish, and then maybe the Mini Tanker. But don't get it too mini if you're a beginner, depending on how big you are. If you're, small, medium, maybe an 8-footer. If you're, 200 pounds, maybe an 8.6, and you should probably consider a 9-footer. So the biggest concern for beginner is stability and wave catching ability. So stability comes with width. Wave catching ability comes with overall volume width and lower rocker. The Yeti is kind of a big guy step-up board, and the Big Cat is kind of a big guy hot dog board. The Zeppelin is designed for smaller waves, a little bit bigger surfer, more of a beginning surfer, because it's got a fair bit of width all the way around. It's got a little bit lower rocker, and then my personal favorite is the Moby Fish. It's got a very broad range of performance, and when maybe the Zeppelin you start to lose control a little bit and surf double overhead. I've ridden my Moby Fish double overhead blacks and been blown away. So yeah, if you're a beginner surfer, 8 to 9 foot, 22.5 to 23 inches wide, and 3.1 to maybe 3.3 thick, and surfing is a very hard sport to learn, and it's very difficult. I've taught some other professional athletes from other sports how to surf. I've taken them out a few times, the first few times, and they come in and they go, wow. And I go, wow, what? And they go, that's freaking hard. I just kind of nod and I go, yeah. You know, if you want to improve your surfing, I think you got to be pretty committed. You got to, I think, a minimum of 3 sessions a week, and you'll improve, you know, steadily. Any less than that, you just should really be worried about the basics, catching a wave, angling, turning a little bit, and if you're a beginning surfer, you do not need a high performance 6.0 board. Trust me, I've had guys that argue with me. They've been surfing less than a year. They argue with me. I go, well, I've been riding an 8-foot wave storm. I want to move down to a 6.0 SD. I go, look, I'll make you whatever you want, but I strongly recommend that you take your time going down in size on the boards. So.
Why are all the shop boards have such a low volume?
All the shop boards?
Yeah. Why all the shop boards have low volume?
I don't know. I haven't been in a surf shop in a few years, except for my own. But why do all the surf shops have such low volume boards? Well, maybe that's where they feel their percentage numbers are at. Boards, the kids out there want to emulate or surf like so and so, and most of the guys that are in the not in the magazines anymore, but on the internet, that are tearing it up are riding relatively very low volume boards. So I think that's probably the reason.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, and we do get a lot of orders for guys going, wow, I want a board with a little bit more volume. So.
Yeah, this guy here, Rusty, shaking a 710 bat tail quad. Need more volume. It's just turned 50. What do you think?
What's the question again?
It's just a comment like Rusty shaking a 710 bat tail quad.
Oh, he
now
wants
I need
a board.
More volume. It's just turned at 50.
Yeah. Yeah. My volume chart is combines experience and weight. And
frequency.
And frequency of how often you surf. And, you can't help it. You get older, you might still be incredibly fit. You might be an advanced surfer. But you're going to have to give in to the creaks and groans of getting older. And your volume is going to need to go up. You said you want a 710 bat tail quad. The width on that, I mean, I don't know, how much do you weigh? As you get older, unfortunately, you need more board.
That's the rule.
That's the rule. As you get heavier, you need more board. As you get older, you definitely need more board. There's a few guys. I have a few friends out there that are in their 60s that are still rocking what they did when they were in their 20s, but, they're freaks. What else you got?
This guy's just wanted to say thank you for all those live feeds. Your wisdom and experience means so much to all of us. Your insights are huge for me. It's pretty cool.
Yeah. I think we got time
for it. We're like 3 minutes away.
Yeah, we got one last question.
Check what it's.
Make America great again. I'm trying. I don't know how much influence, but I'm trying. Do you ever wish that you'd stayed small, like, say, Dave Parmenter? Dude, I had no choice. I was born big. I think by the time I was in 7th or 8th grade, I was like 6'3" or 6'4" and closing in on 200 pounds. So I really didn't have any choice. There's some good things about being big. And Dave Parmenter, by the way, I love Dave. He rode for me and he started shaping a couple of years later, and he's a quality person.
What are some models that benefit someone who preference their front foot through turns?
Models that suit front foot surfers. It goes back to the proportions of the board, really. If you're a front foot surfer, you want a little bit more area up front. You maybe want a little bit more volume up front. And the reverse is true if someone is really truly a back foot surfer. I think most people are pretty balanced in their stance. They might move forward a little bit when they're trying to drive, but you gotta look at the proportions of your board. And maybe next week I'll get into proportions a little bit. But time has run out. Thank all of you for joining me and Pedro, and have a great week. Take care.